Joyce stops Carlos Takam in the 6th round. This was the fastest anybody has ever stopped Carlos Takam. He'd had 3 previous stoppage defeats. However, as impressive as that result looks on paper for Joyce, in the ring, it weren't quite so impressive in the eyes of most people because Joyce got hit a lot and appeared to struggle quite badly through the first few rounds. Now, Joyce, as we all know, is a very big, very slow, very clunky heavyweight. But against somebody like Daniel Dubois, who stands straight up, with no head movement, who's a very big target, who's quite tall himself, Joe was able to reach him with a jab with relative ease because Dubois is not moving off the center line. His head is just right there up in the air all the time. But with Carlos Takam, he was fighting a much shorter man who was moving his head, who was moving his feet, who was crouching low. So that was a much more difficult target for Joyce to make connections with. And this is why he found it so difficult to find his range, to find his timing, because of the fact that Takam is just a more awkward target, being shorter, moving his head, moving his feet, coming in at different angles, and of course, slinging shots back over the top in a fashion which Joyce found somewhat unpredictable. So I don't think this was a regression. I know Josh Taylor was very critical of Joyce in the post-fight discussion on BT. He said that this is one of the worst performances he's seen from Joyce. I just think it's a case of styles make fights. I think that Takam's style is an awkward style for Joyce. A guy of his type of attributes, right? Being slow and clunky and struggling with coordination a lot of the time. And this is why I'm going to keep on saying this. If you're a smaller heavyweight, being big and bulky doesn't help you. In fact, it takes something away from you. Now, with Carlos Takam, I don't know how much weights he lifts or whatever the case may be, but he's always been a very big, bulky heavyweight. I suspect that most of this muscularity that Carlos Takam has is actually natural. And yes, some people are just that big, folks. Especially people from West Africa. I've seen some people over the years, West African guys, massive, big, bulky guys, and you ask them, do you do weights? They don't do weights. They're fresh off the plane from Cameroon or wherever, and they're just that bulky naturally, eating all that fufu and cassava and all this kind of stuff. Yam, right? Yam, by the way, for those of you who don't know, certain types of yam contain a natural steroid. That's a fact. Go look that up. Certain types of yam, and we eat yam in the Caribbean too, but they eat a lot more in West Africa. Certain types of yam contain natural steroids. Okay, and yam is often a staple in many parts of West Africa. So anyway, Carlos Takam's speed, really. The head movement, the fluidity, the speed of hand, speed of foot. Not like he's lightning fast, but compared to Joyce, he's fast. This is why I believe that a small heavyweight, and Takam's not a small heavyweight, so don't misconstrue what I'm saying here, okay? I am talking about the likes of the Michael Hunters and the Alexander Usaks, those kind of guys. Small heavyweights need to accentuate their advantages over big heavyweights, which are, of course, speed, fluidity, mobility. Because your hands can't hit what your eyes can't see, as Muhammad Ali used to say. So this big guy can have all the strength on you, he can have all the power on you, but if you're able to nullify his power with your speed, by the fact that he can't land on you, he can't get the coordination right, he can't get the timing, he can't get the distance, because you're moving in and out of range and you're moving off to the side and you're pinging him with counters. Don't underestimate the value in that at heavyweight. So Carlos Takam, as I say, used the speed, the movement, and so on. Again, not like he was moving around the ring like Muhammad Ali, but, he was using a little bit of footwork here and there, and it was mainly head movement and staying low and then slinging shots over the top. But at 40 years of age, against a big, strong guy like Joyce, who was applying pressure on Takam, by the way, I've seen some people online say that Takam should have tried to walk Joyce down the way he did against Derek Chisora. I think Takam realized quite early on that Joyce was too big and strong for that. As tremendously strong as Carlos Takam is, there are some fighters out there even stronger. Okay? And I think he realized quite early that Joyce was very, very strong. Very, very big. I mean, Takam's huge. What does he weigh? 250 pounds? Joyce is like 263. And he's not some pumped up bodybuilder at 263. This is his natural weight. He's a very, very big man. Heavy bones, dense muscles, big legs, everything. He's just a huge man. And Takam realized, okay. And by the way, Takam does switch things up in fights. He'll often fight a 12-round bout. And in the first half, he'll move about. And in the second half, he'll apply pressure. And sometimes he reverses that. Sometimes he applies pressure for the first half of the bout, then he moves around for the second half of the bout. So it's possible that he may have intended to do that against Joe Joyce in this fight here. Although I suspect not, because, again, 40 years old, probably doesn't have the punch resistance he used to have, and I'll come on to that a little bit later on. I was impressed by his ability to go, was it 10 or 12 in one of his most recent bouts? Up on his feet, popping a jab for the whole bout. But he didn't have a guy putting the pressure on him that Joyce was putting on him. Just with Joyce's physical presence, he was forcing Takam to throw a lot of shots. Takam knew that if he becomes flat-footed and stationary, Joyce is going to start teeing off. So he wanted to keep his head movement. He wanted to keep stepping around and giving this guy angles, and that takes energy. And Joyce was just relentlessly on him. And it's almost like a horror movie. When you're in there against this big juggernaut of a man, he's very slow and clunky, but he keeps coming at you, and you crack him with your best shots, as Takam did. Got those little Grant gloves on, hard little fight gloves, cracked Joyce, bang on the chin, bang in the mouth, with his best overhand rights, and nothing happened. That's got to be like a horror movie. You're hitting a guy with your best shots, you're loading up, you're swinging over the top, and this guy keeps coming at you. And so that's psychologically draining, because you're thinking, well, hang on, how long is this fight going to go on for where I have to do all this moving at 250 pounds and 40 years of age, moving my upper body, stepping around, using my feet? How long is this going to go on for? And this guy's not discouraged. Joyce just kept walking him down. And I want to say by the fourth or fifth round, you noticed Takam was slowing. His feet weren't as quick anymore. His upper body movement weren't as quick. Joyce was getting through with more shots. Then, of course, by the sixth round, at the start of the sixth, it almost came out of nowhere. Takam fell apart very quickly. Joyce caught him with a combination at the very start of the round. I think it was a left, right, left. And Takam staggered backwards, and he was bleeding from the face. I think the nose and the mouth. Joyce then stuck it on him. Takam threw about 2 or 3 punches back, but Joyce just kept punching. When Takam staggered again, after being caught with a couple of Joyce punches, the referee, Steve Gray, decided to step in and stop the bout. Takam was very angry. He felt like it was a premature stoppage. Most of the people online feel like it was a premature stoppage. When you watch the replay back in slow motion, it doesn't actually look that bad, but Derek Chisora, because he was at this fight, he mentioned something. He made a very good point. He said, if you watch something back in slow motion, it's going to look worse than it actually is. Right? Because the time elapsed is a lot longer in slow motion. Whereas if you watch something in real time, it often doesn't look as bad as it does in slow motion. In slow motion, you see the facial contortions from the punches landing and all this kind of stuff. But in real time, it doesn't look quite that dramatic. In real time, the amount of time that elapses during the attack is a lot shorter. You see? So my initial impression watching it live was that this was a premature stoppage. I know that fighters have to throw punches back in order for the referee to know that they're still in it and they're not totally out. I get that. But a guy as experienced as Carlos Takam, who's been around the block, who's been in, world heavyweight title fight against Anthony Joshua, and he wasn't happy about the stoppage in that fight either. So perhaps he feels like coming to the UK, this is like a running theme of referees jumping in too early. And I've said this in previous videos. I don't like these British stoppages. Now, sometimes, of course, I do agree with the stoppages in the UK. You have to take it on a case-by-case basis, but there is this, God, how can I describe it? Concerning trend of premature stoppages in British fights. And it's been going on for years. This is nothing new. And it's always been the case that in Britain, generally speaking, the referees are quicker to jump in than they are in America, where they tend to let things go on. That was the same even in the 80s and 90s. But if you compare British referees in the 80s and 90s to now, they're way quicker to jump in now. And of course, we had plenty of tragedies in British rings over the past few decades. And I'm sure that there is genuine concern. People don't want to see those kind of tragedies occur again. But that's where the line is, right? Between protecting fighters, but also giving the fighter an opportunity to recover from a situation. Because right here, Carlos Takam was furious that Steve Gray stopped the fight. Now, this is not a guy who was so badly out of it that he couldn't protest when the fight was stopped. No, he immediately shoved Steve Gray and said, "What are you doing?" And, it's a fine line. Do I think that Carlos Takam would have won this fight if he'd been allowed to continue against Joe Joyce? No. I think he was fading in the previous rounds. Again, I think the pressure that, even though Joyce wasn't landing a load of shots, I just think the physical presence and the mental pressure of this big juggernaut of a man continuously coming at you. You've hit him with all your best shots and you're thinking, wow, it didn't even discourage this guy. If anything, it encouraged him. And I actually saw that a few times in this fight, where Takam would catch Joyce clean on the chin, and you'd almost see Joyce get mad. And all of a sudden, he'd up his pace because he wants to get the guy back. So when you're up against someone like that at 40 and you're 250, obviously hardly got any fat on him, Takam, but carrying those heavy muscles around is taxing. And as I say, the movement, leg movement, upper body movement, it's taxing. And then you're hitting the guy, he's not discouraged, he's only encouraged. I think it was a matter of time before Carlos Takam was going to capitulate here. But yeah, I would say that they should have at least allowed a knockdown to occur before stepping in and stopping this bout. At least allow a knockdown. A guy this experienced who was actually winning the bout. That's another thing. I mean, that's probably the crucial thing here, is that Carlos Takam was actually winning this fight. Or at least even. Yeah? Well, it can't be even after 5. This was the 6 where it was stopped, right? So, no, I want to say he was winning the bout. Yeah, some people might disagree. I think he was winning the bout. So when a guy is winning a bout and you stop him in this fashion, when he's this experienced, and it's not like Joe Joyce is some, one-punch knockout specialist. He's a big clunky guy. When he followed up after hurting Takam at the start of the 6, most of his shots were blocked or missed. So the referee should be taking that into account as well. So, I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Look, here's what I will say. There are some people out there who say that this was not a premature stoppage and it was perfectly reasonable by Steve Gray. I'm not saying that your opinion is ridiculous, by the way. This was not the worst stoppage I've ever seen. it was a bit on the premature side in my opinion. But it wasn't horrible. It wasn't scandalous. I've seen far more scandalous things than this. So, anyway, that's my view on Joyce Takam. Obviously, you got a load of people who, after the Dubois fight, were praising Joyce, saying, wow, this guy could actually be a problem in the heavyweight division. And now after the Takam fight, they're all saying the opposite. Oh, he'll get chinned by everybody in the top 5. Always keep in mind that styles make fights. Not everybody in the top 10 or top 5 is going to be able to have the kind of movement, the upper body movement, the foot movement that Takam had, which gave Joyce so many problems. Not everybody's going to have that. This is what you have to bear in mind. Some guys are going to be more upright like Daniel Dubois. And when they are, guess what? Joyce's jab is going to be popping against those kind of guys. And not everybody's going to be coming in low like a Takam who's only, 6 foot, 6'1"? Slinging the overhand rights over the top from unusual angles. From Joe Joyce's perspective, right? He's not used to fighting guys this short normally. I know he has fought a couple, like Berman Stavern and what have you. But Stavern was beyond finished. Takam still has a little bit left. So, and obviously he's in much better shape than Berman Stavern. So, I don't think we really learned anything new about Joe Joyce here. This is why my view, my perception of Joyce hasn't really changed after this bout. Because Joyce has been in fights before where he's been getting clipped all over the place. He got clipped quite a few times against Berman Stavern, got clipped against Bryant Jennings. You know, he's there to be hit. In his amateur career, he was getting clipped all over the place. You look at that Usyk fight in the WSB. He was getting lit up like a Christmas tree. So Joyce is never going to be a guy, and this is another thing which they pointed out. Who was on the panel? The analysis panel, if you want to call it that, on BT. Enzo Macronelli. Now, I think it was Macronelli. I don't think it was Ben Davison and John Rawlin on the commentary. I think it was I think it might have been Macronelli who said that. Was it Macronelli? I can't think now, but somebody was speaking on this Joyce Takam fight, and they said that Joyce really didn't respect Takam's punching power. And that's why he was so reckless. That's why he was so willing to take 2 or 3 to land 1. Because he believed in his chin and he believed in his own power, and he wasn't impressed by Takam's power. Whereas against a guy like Dubois, whose power he did respect, whose power he was wary of, he fought in a much more defensively responsible fashion. And I do think there could be an element of that, but I also believe that he was just thrown off by Takam's movement. And he didn't feel comfortable just sitting back because, you know, he wanted to try and get to grips with the guy. He didn't want to allow the guy to be able to run rings around him. So he wanted to try and get to grips with him. I also feel there was an element of that going on. So it was what it was. It's Joyce. Joyce is an optical illusion. He is a guy who looks extremely novice-y. He's a guy who looks extremely slow and crude, but somehow he has been very successful in the amateurs, in the WSB, and even as a pro. He's been moved quickly, and he's got some good names on his record for a guy with so few fights. Beating Daniel Dubois and Bryant Jennings and Berman Stavern and now Carlos Takam. These are good names for somebody with so few fights. How many fights has Joe Joyce had? 13 fights. You look at the guys he's fought for 13 fights. That's not a bad record at all. Okay, obviously, because he was so experienced as an amateur, you can move a guy like this more quickly. But the point I'm making here is, for someone who's so slow and easy to hit and so clunky and mechanical and robotic, it almost defies logic that he's able to be so successful. That's why I say he's an optical illusion. So there are going to be some fights, many other fights in the future, where Joyce looks just horrible for long stretches. And I'm sure Joyce is going to lose, like I'm sure every other heavyweight out there is going to lose. But I think he's going to confuse people because there are going to be performances like this where everybody's writing Joyce off. Then he'll fight a different style, maybe against a taller guy. And based upon the previous poor performance against the Takam or whatever, people are going to say, he's going to get washed here, Joyce. Then he'll come out and do something similar to what he did to Dubois. So people need to watch the styles that Joyce encounters. Because it's the styles which will determine, I think, a lot of the time, how well Joyce does. Not necessarily the level the fighter's at. Yeah? He could fight a guy in the top 10, top 5, who most people would pick over Takam, and Joyce may do better against that guy than he did against Takam. Get hit less. Be more impressive. You know, and again, let's not forget, he did stop Takam, whether you think it's premature or not. He hurt him at the start of that 6. He had him going, he put his shots together, he hurt him again, and the referee jumped in. So, on paper, that's a good performance. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Joyce, Carlos Takam. Was it a premature stoppage? Or were you one of the people who thought it was a reasonable stoppage or not too bad? And has your perception of Joyce changed after this performance? Are you one of those people who was quite optimistic about Joyce's future following that Dubois fight? But then after seeing this Takam fight, you're like, oh, wow, no, Joyce is not going to make it at all. This guy is a sitting duck for any of the guys in the top 5, maybe even top 10. If that's your perspective, let me know in the comments section as well. I'm out. Come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide range of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&A sessions, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high-quality MP3. We've also got a Discord server where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. There's no contract, no commitment, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.